southbounder. But if you're going northbound, you actually get to read this beautiful descent. However, the first year that I went northbound, after doing it in 2012 and having a GPS track, I figured out that in 2010, I actually went about 80 miles longer than I was supposed to. There's this beautiful church at the bottom of this descent, and it's been there since 1823, and the area has been settled longer than this country's been in existence by Spanish settlers. And it's just a really pretty little corner of New Mexico, and it's very much just forest and not desert, and you know, it's great to be in the trees after baking. But as you drop down into this town that's beautiful, you realize your next big obstacle is the Bozos Ridge, which is, I think, some of the more rough technical terrain along the whole route, and it's pretty out there. But I stopped at this campground, and there was a campground host, and she didn't even charge me for my camp spot, and she had water, and she just was a really sweet lady, although I think she was really lonely and chatted my ear off for probably close to 2 hours. This is one of the smoother sections of the Bozos, but you're along this ridge line. And I didn't take much pictures through this section. I was just trying to get to Colorado. That was like my next line, you know, imaginary line to get to and to push forward to. So I was pretty happy once I got there. I was a little... Yep. Yeah, it's New Mexico is if you don't take the pavement alternates, it's probably 90% dirt roads, the rest pavement. So then you drop down, and Southwest Colorado is just stunning. My pictures really just don't do it justice. I get to the lodge, eat a ridiculous amount. Where is it? This is Platoro, Colorado. From Platoro, you climb to Independence Pass, which is the highest point along the whole entire divide route by adventure cycling, and you're at 11.2 at the high point there.
Was there snow?
There was snow. I ended up only having to post hole through about a half mile that year. So, again, you'll see a running theme here. Carrots to, you know, keep you going. And so I got to Del Norte, which is on the other side of Independence Pass. And got to Del Norte, and they had some sort of festival going on. And I was pretty shelled, and there was no room at the inn, so to speak. So I ended up staying at a kind of this really hole in the wall, and yeah, I think I got some bed bugs there. So I was pretty thrilled about waking up with that. So pushing forward north from Del Norte, heading towards Salida, Colorado, there's just some really neat country that, again, I figured out that the year that I didn't have a GPS with me, I had made not a drastic wrong turn, but I actually was off route and I hadn't followed the route properly, which was kind of a bummer, but also kind of I was pretty happy about my choice to have a GPS in 2012. My coldest night in 2012 on the Divide was about an hour after this point, and my little tiny postage stamp sized thermometer was telling me that it dropped down to 19 that night. And I woke up with about a quarter-inch of frost on my bivy sack. From that point, I climbed up over into Salida and stopped into kind of one of my favorite bike shops in Colorado, Absolute Bikes, and got my good dose of. If you've ever been to that shop, there's this wonderful mechanic and service manager. His name is Scott Banks, and he has this wonderful sense of sarcasm, and he's just an excellent guy to be around. And I roll in, and he's like, "Well, what do you need, Dave?" I was like, "Oh, there's a stand out back on the patio. Go, help yourself." Get coffee, and I ended up wolfing down, I think, 3 burritos next to the shop, resupplied with waffles, bought new socks, just threw out the socks that I was using, had a beer, kept on rolling. From Salida, you climb again a pretty significant amount up into South Park. And South Park is, I've always not really enjoyed being there because it seems like every time I've pedaled, no matter what direction, I've always run into a headwind. But fortunately, 2012, I had a tailwind through most of South Park. And I got to Boreas Pass, or the base of Boreas Pass, and stayed at a bed and breakfast who's owned by this British gentleman named David, and he follows the race religiously, and he was we keep these. Most of the racers choose to have a spot GPS tracker on them so that their friends and family and anybody else who decides to spectate can kind of see where everybody's at on the race and whatnot. Well, David's an avid spot stalker, so he was watching all the dots and seeing where everybody was at, and he stayed up. I rolled it into there about 11, and he was up, and he only charged me $40 for the night and 2 pints of beer and a nice hot shower, so I was pretty stoked, and he gave me breakfast the next morning. I booked it over Boreas, rolled all the way through Silverthorne, really quick mileage, and just south or just north of Kremling, there's another pass, and you end up going a little bit further east to stay near the Divide. And instead of going on the highway and sticking to dirt roads as you're heading north to Kremling. And I love this view because you're looking into Eagle's Nest Wilderness, and it's definitely one of my favorite spots in Colorado, and partially because I've ridden around that area a lot, so it's like I was in home turf.
Hey, Dave, is that your full rig and all your gear right there?
Yep.
Where's the sleep
Sleeping bags in right behind the saddle. That's again the bed and breakfast before you hit Boreas Pass. Once you get to Kremling, then you kind of swing west and you head towards the Colorado River and you head towards Radium, Colorado. And there's railroad tracks, and this is really close to my folks' property near Gore Pass. So it's like, kind of, even though I wasn't planning on stopping, it was kind of like horse headed to the barn for his hay. Just like total, like I know where I'm at. Super familiar with the area. Cruising along. I stopped real briefly to say hi to my mom and then continue on to Steamboat. And really was happy to have gotten over a hurdle and have gotten past where I had a failure point before. So I was very happy to get down to Steamboat Reservoir. And one of the beautiful sections of single track that actually is on the route is right around that reservoir. Then get to Steamboat, and actually this is my friend PJ. I didn't know she was working at a coffee shop in Kremling. It was one of my childhood friends, that was his mom, so I had no idea that she was working at that coffee shop, so that was one of the bigger surprises of 2012 on the route. Get to Steamboat, motel it, and just because I knew the next section, I probably wasn't staying anywhere or doing anything other than under the stars until at least Rawlins, Wyoming. So as I'm climbing out of Steamboat, there's one of kind of the last convenience stores, and it was like 10 a.m. and I was feeling good and fresh, and stopped in to resupply. Well, they have this beautiful cooler full of ice cream sandwiches and ice cream bars. I think I scared the gal at the counter a little bit when I went up and bought my 6th ice cream bar. From that point on Steamboat, as I rode past the Brush Mountain Lodge, I knew that Matthew Lee was taking care of the lodge for a few months for Kristen, and Brush Mountain Lodge is kind of one of those spots that if you're a divide racer, you know of the Brush Mountain Lodge and you know of Kristen, if not haven't met her, and it's kind of one of those spots that you kind of just, even if you're really, really diehard racing, you still stop there and say hi and at least poke your head in. Kristen's also another one of those individuals that's following all the racers and keeps an eye out, and if you're rolling in late, she stays up and just to make sure to take care of you and if you need anything. The ice cream bars. Again, I felt it proper to have a bit of one of the surprises that Danny had hidden in my gear, and Matthew had bought a bottle of Stranahan's, and for a number of years I distilled whiskey there. So, and Matthew's a whiskey fan, so we shared a little bit of that, and I ended up spending about an hour and a half there that I hadn't planned, but there was still light to be had, so I kept on pushing. That's Matthew's son. I pushed on towards Battle Mountain, and just ended up stopping that evening right on the Wyoming-Colorado border, and was in kind of some territory that I hadn't really ridden the route before. So I was pretty excited and stoked that I'd gone further and pushed myself a lot further than I had on the route. So I was in a really good headspace. As soon as I got off of Battle Mountain and get out of the trees, I was in a situation where, if you haven't been to Wyoming, there's a lot of wind. And as soon as I got out of the trees, I was battling crosswinds because the wind was coming out of the west. And a frame bag, basically a bag that fits into the front triangle of your bike, is a wonderful thing for carrying lots of gear. However, it also has a tendency to turn into a sail and catch the wind kind of funny. So I was battling some crosswinds as I was rolling into Rawlins. I get into Rawlins at about 4:30 or so in the afternoon, and I'm just kind of beat from kind of fighting my bicycle. And I'm sitting there, and I go to a coffee shop, have an espresso and an ice cream, jump on the internet, and see what the wind forecast is. And they say it's gusting until 9:30 at night. So I was like, and the wind's supposed to be calm at 2 a.m. So it's like, okay, well, I'll motel it and I'll set my alarm for 2 a.m. So go in, crash hard. The alarm wakes me up from when you're in that deep sleep and the alarm wakes you up and you're just like, don't even know where you're at. It was kind of one of those, but I connected the dots, gathered my stuff, and just peeked my head out the motel door, and it was still just like blowing. And I'm like, kind of just made that, yeah, I'm gonna set the alarm for 7 a.m. now. So wake up at 7 a.m., resupply, because I know what I'm headed into is the Great Basin. From Rawlins, Wyoming to Atlantic City, Wyoming, there's one spring that's consistent on the north side. That's at about mile 154. But otherwise, you're looking at roughly a 150-mile stretch with no water, no food, no resupply points. So I packed up. I thought I had enough with about nearly 20,000 calories and about 340 ounces of fluid. My first day into the basin, I only covered maybe 78 miles, and my average speed that first day was 4 miles an hour before I crashed out. If you're going northbound, most of the time you're headed to the west, and the wind is typically coming from the west, so you're constantly in a headwind. And at this point, I was starting to see a lot of the southbound riders, and they had this like tailwind and hand from God push wind, and they were blowing by me like a Mach 7, and a few of my friends stopped and we exchanged pleasantries, and they like turned to face the wind, and they're like looking at me like, oh, I'm glad I'm not doing what you're doing. And then I'm wishing I was doing what they were doing. But this place is kind of one of those like wide open expanses that there just isn't a lot of people, and there's not, and you kind of, even though it's difficult and hard, it was kind of one of those places where you get into your own head and really are able to meditate a bit, even with the wind whistling through your ears and your brain. Keep running into folks. I ran into John, and we just met, exchanged messages online, and I kind of knew what he looked like, and he was camped out kind of in this low spot that was somewhat protected by the wind, and I was like, hey John, hey, who goes there? Are you right? He's there with a tent and a bike, so it's like more than likely he's riding the divide route. Like, mind if I crash, nearby? And he's like, yeah, sure, go for it. So met each other in person, and then like 2 ships passed in the night. We both got up early to start, and I thought I was going slow that first day in the basin. The second day was even slower. I got to Mingus Well, and I think I literally had 2 ounces left in one of my water bottles. And I was cramping up because I was kind of conserving my fluids. And so I got to the Mingus Well, filled up my bottles, chugged down probably 3 or 4 bottles there, ate some more food, and kind of just sat for a bit and composed myself. But it was blowing so hard that it was like, well, there isn't really any way to be out of the wind, so keep going. Fortunately, from Mingus Well to Atlantic City, there's roughly 8 miles or so. So it wasn't a too bad a stretch to where I knew there was food and water and clean water. So I'm rolling along, and I keep running into the southbounders. Giorgio, wonderful German fellow that's been on the divide a few times, and just one of those like sparkling, positive personalities. I mean, I think he could literally be on fire and he'd still have a smile on his face. And get to Atlantic City, and the only bar and restaurant that's there, I roll in, and the bartender and the gal that were waiting the tables were like, well, where are you coming from? And I told them, and they're like, okay, well, we've had a lot of people through today, so I only have tater tots and 1 hamburger left. Before the next morning when we get another delivery. I was like, well, I'll take whatever you got and give me 2 beers. I moseyed along a little past Atlantic City and then South Pass City. Cool to kind of, cross and kind of parallel the California Trail a bit and to still see the 2 wagon ruts. Even 120, 150 years later is pretty incredible. My friend Revan, and she had been spot stocking, and I come around, this was like right before I got to Atlantic City. I come around this corner, and I see a pickup truck with this giant thing hanging off the back with a tarp covering it. I'm like, what the heck's that? So I'm coming around this corner, and then I see this gal jumping around, and my friend Revan had been spot stocking, and she was she does sculpture, these big kinetic sculptures, and she was waiting there to see if I'd come through in their time frame, and she stopped to say hi and give me a hug, and And nothing else, she was familiar with the self-supported rules, and she just, was like one of those big surprises and big big morale boosts for sure. Ran into Max at the lodge. He had had the 2 other burgers before me, so there was only one left. Crashed just outside of South Pass City, and then I run into this cat. Justin Spumoni is a pretty awesome friend of mine. He had done the divide before. This was his second time doing the divide, and he was doing it on a single speed. He hadn't ridden a bicycle before he met me, and 3 years later, he did the divide the first time, and after he heard about my bike getting stolen, and he was riding a Fixie all around Denver, and just really fun, gregarious guy. Well, last year he actually rode to all the 14ers and then hiked up them and then back around, and he's just an animal. And it's kind of fun to see somebody that has gone gonzo. Get into Pinedale, Wyoming. Pretty excited. It's not windy anymore. Getting back into trees, water. Keep running into riders going southbound. This is one of the oldest gentlemen to ever finish the divide route. I think he did it in just over 40 days this particular year. He's 68 years old. Climbing again, getting back into the trees, more bears. I was close to the top of this pass, and again, I ate more than I bought, so I was getting kind of hungry, and I just roll along the road, and I see the Snickers. Folks that do a lot of long distance stuff will like to describe this as trail magic, and I was pretty excited about the Snickers, and it was even in the cold water to a degree, so it wasn't even melted, or it was like even refrigerated. It was, I think, the best Snickers I've ever eaten. Keep running into folks. Another beer. Had 3 of these moose desserts. Heading over into Jackson, and from 2007, this was kind of my other stopping point. So Jackson really felt pretty fantastic to be rolling through, because that was the other speed bump I've hit in the past, and I was pretty excited to be there. However, if you're going northbound versus southbound, if you're going southbound, you can get into Teton National Park without paying a park entrance fee. But if you're going northbound, you got to pay $12 as a cyclist to get into the park. Burger. So yeah, $12. As I had that burger at the Grand Teton Lodge, and had a couple of beers, and it was probably 3-ish when I left, and it was like, cool, I'm gonna make Idaho tonight. another state out of the way. Uh, as I climb up and cross the border into Idaho, it took me a little longer to do that climb than I had anticipated. As I'm descending down into Idaho, I see this was probably nearly 10 p.m. I see this big black thing kind of move out of the ditch into the road, like right in front of me. I'm thinking cow. Well, as I got a little bit closer, it's like, no, that's bigger than a cow. That's way bigger than a cow. Turn aggressively. We both like nearly collide into each other, but it was a big grizzly. We were probably 5 foot apart as I'm descending, and I was kind of sleepy at that point until I had that encounter. I pedaled for probably nearly 3 hours more just to get distance between me and Mr. Bear. And what I was kind of low on my battery, so I was kind of using moonlight, and there wasn't any traffic or anything, so I wasn't worried about getting smacked by a car, but I couldn't really see where I camped. So I'm moving along, I decide to stop. Well, as soon as I decided to stop that evening, it was like, and I'd already pulled out my bivvy, and I think like the sound of my zippers was like the dinner bell for the mosquitoes. You know, it was dark, I was tired, it was nearly 1 a.m. in the morning, and it was like, whatever. I like zipped up even though it was warm in the bivvy, the bug screen, and kind of been sweating like a clam in my sleeping bag, and it was just like, okay, whatever, I'm just tired, passed out. I wake up the next morning. As soon as I open the zipper, again, dinner bell or breakfast bell, and the mosquitoes just like descend on me. Well, I decided to camp like right next to a swamp, but since it was dark, I didn't realize that there was that much water near me, and that yeah, there might be mosquitoes. So I'm doing everything I can to pack up really quick and lash everything onto my bike and to get moving so I could like try to outrun the mosquitoes. The mosquitoes in that part of Idaho, they go about 8 miles an hour. So as long as you're going more than 8 miles an hour, you're good. Drop into Idaho, and that is the shortest segment of any state. There's only you're only in Idaho for about 90 miles or so. But of that 90 miles, about 60 of it is on this old railroad grade, and it's also used by ATVers. So this old railroad grade and ATVers that like to jam through this section, it turns it into 60 miles of washboard that just is very constant. I got through that section and ran into kind of a mutual friend of my former housemate and I, Michelle. And I had, you know, I just kind of answered some questions online and didn't really know her, so it was nice to meet her in person. And she just had her food, and you know, she was in a hurry, so we just kind of briefly met right on the Montana-Idaho border. And at the Montana-Idaho border, I carried a Zonker Stout, which if you haven't ever had a Zonker Stout from Grand Teton Brewing, it's a fantastic beer. And I carried one specifically for the Montana-Idaho border crossing, which incidentally is also a divide, which is also on that imaginary divide line. So the ATVs, my friend Michelle that I just mentioned, floor washboard. I got to Lyman, Montana, which that's kind of another one of these spots that there isn't a lot going on there, but it's kind of one of the only places you can kind of resupply for a number of miles around it. And was pretty excited to hit that point as well. Some big climbs. Ran into some more southbounders. Traffic. My friend Pete was also spot stalking me, and he ran into me outside of Lyman and insisted that that he needed to give me this bottle of whiskey. Crashed out in the middle of nowhere. One of the years through this section, I had plenty of food this time, but in 2007, through this area, I had not checked one of the towns whether or not they were open or not. So I had, in 2007, been through this section and covered 100 miles on one Cliff Bar. I ran into this lovely couple from Australia. There's a portion of the Great Divide route and the Trans-America route that are the exact same. And so I ran into this couple, and it was like, oh, cool. And it was just about lunchtime, so we all stopped and had lunch and just kind of, hung out and figured out where we were going and all that. And, it's like, awesome. We might not ever see each other again, but, rad. Nice to meet you, another cyclist. Further on into Montana, met another couple from Norway that was touring the route. And I ended up sharing that whiskey that Pete had given me, and they gave me Hershey's bars, and we had kind of a little party that night. I get to the Grasshopper Inn, and I pop in and with my bike helmet on and have a bite to eat, and order a beer and a burger, and the owner of the place starts grilling me, like, what you're doing, where are you staying, what's going on, and I was like, well, this is I feel like I'm getting kind of grilled here a little bit, like, what's up? And he's like, well, Divide Racer, this gal, broke into one of my buildings the other night after hours and crashed in our bathroom. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, yeah, it wasn't me. I mean, I told him the direction that I was going and like where I'd ridden from, and he was like, okay, left a big tip, and was like, that was weird. Well, when I got to Butte, which was the next big city, it was, I jumped on the internet and come to find out that it appeared Michelle had broken into that building because, yeah, anyway, I don't know all the details of that story, but you know, if you're doing one of these big epic things, you know, you kind of ought to think about who might be following after you on how you conduct yourself and whatnot. So after the Grasshopper Lounge, there's this area that's pretty low traffic pavement. It's really scenic. You end up running into a lot of folks that are just cruising kind of the bike path thing, and kind of nice just to run into some people and just see some humanity. And then one of your fun things that you get to do if you're going northbound is Fleecer Ridge. Fleecer Ridge is a hoot if you're going southbound. It's a pretty technical descent, but I think if memory serves me right, you gain about 1,400 feet in about 2 miles. And it's basically a fall line route, and it's straight up. And so that was kind of my thoughts of Fleecer. And as I'm pushing the bike up, I'm getting attacked by the mosquitoes again, and horse flies, and so I'm kind of like pushing the bike and then swapping, and just, you know, you can't go 8 miles an hour up something that's about that. So I get to the top of that at about, I think it was nearly 8 p.m. that evening, and I'm just like, I just need to keep going to get away from these bugs. I ended up crashing just down the hill a little ways, and again, it was a buggy night, and it was kind of warm, so I just ended up kind of sweltering in the bivvy, but I was kind of done and tired, so I crashed for the night, and it's like, okay, it's like 35 miles to Butte. At this point, my tires were kind of worn. About 3 days prior, I'd asked a friend of mine in Utah to send my care package that I already packed up. Like, I'll send it to the outdoorsman in Butte. Rob Leepheimer owns that shop. And I was like, yeah, Cimarron, just send it up to Rob, and it'll be there when I get to Butte. And so it's like, okay, yeah, I'll get into Butte, I'll have a bunch of food, I'll resupply, put new tires on the bike, and hang out with Rob a little bit, and then I'll keep on going. Well, I got to, ended up taking a little bit longer than I thought to get to Butte. It's kind of hard to see, but on that picture, the knobs were pretty much paper thin in the center of the tread. I was pretty stoked though that that pair of tires went nearly 2,000 miles and no flats, so I was pretty happy about that. Really happy to put new tires on. Put a new chain on at the time, and sealant, and kind of just cleaned up a little bit, and Rob let me use one of the stands, and it, you know, another one of those like angels of the route that if it's looking like you'll be there late or what have you, he's usually hanging out in the shop late, and you can usually manipulate him to open the door. Ended up crashing at the KOA campground in Butte that night, and that was my shortest day of the route, was from Fleecer Ridge to Butte, and my shortest day of the route was 35 miles. From Butte, you climb up again, but it's a pavement climb. It's pretty easy. Then you get on this other railroad grade, and you go through these tunnels, and it's really pretty. Ran into my friend Caitlin, and I'm forgetting her boyfriend's name at the time. I think it was Matthew. And they were going northbound as well, and they were kind of just touring the route. But we rode together for a bit, and it was Caitlin's birthday, so we ended up having pizza together and hanging out a bit. And they're like, "Well, what are you shooting for today?" You know, we'll think, we'll get to the capital, you know, we think, but we aren't sure. So it's like, well, that sounds like a good plan for today. So I kind of just hung with them, and after we had pizza, and then I realized that one of the cages that I was holding a bag onto my fork leg was kind of cracking, so I reinforced it with some zip ties, and I thought it would hold. And so, you know, outside the butte, yeah, zip tied it up and, you know, MacGyvered it. Pizza with Caitlin and Matthew. Ran into another southbounder. Well, and then as we climbed, and then we descended, that cage decided to finally break off completely, and my bivy stack and pad fell in between my tire and my fork leg, and I went over the bars and used my face as a brake pad and my helmet. And at the time didn't know it, but also broke my nose. So I get into town and have a beer, and then I ended up just kind of bumming it at the city park there, and I ended up the next morning going to a coffee shop, and there was a registered nurse in line and saw my face all looking like I'd been in a fight, and she was asking me what was going on, and I explained what was going on, and she kind of looked at me and was like, "Yeah, your nose is broken, and yeah, you know, it doesn't look like, you know, your jaw or cheekbones are broken or anything like that. If you want to get checked out, you know, I'll be opening it up in about an hour." And it's like, okay. So waited around, got checked out by her, and she even offered, like, "Oh, if you need a place to crash tonight, you know, my husband and I will let you sleep on the living room floor." And it's like, I want to keep going, and just felt weird, kind of a weird situation. It was like, I'll keep moving. So that day out of crap, my brain's forgetting the capital of Montana at the moment. Helena. That's so out of Helena, I'm like grudgingly getting some miles in, and I'd gone by Ace Hardware to fix my racks, and I came up with a kind of a solution so I could still strap some of my gear onto the fork legs without carrying it on my back. This was the day after. So my solution was I got this like sheet metal flashing stuff and bolted it on, and worked great. And it cost me, I think, $7.
Is salsa a proof of that?
Salsa and I have had some interesting conversations on the everything cage. The current one isn't made out of aluminum. This was the wonderful Ace Hardware store that one of the guys in back let me use. He like cut the metal for me and like helped me out, and yeah, it was literally $6 and like 45 minutes of time. more food. I in the next town north out of Helena, it's kind of a small town, and I rolled in kind of late because of the hurting face, and there's this little cute Catholic church, and they have this nice patch of grass, and I was like, I'll just visit out behind the church, and I'll be up before anybody even knows that I'm probably there. Well, there's sprinklers going on at 3 a.m. Really good alarm clock. So between my sprinkler call and going to Sealy Lake, Montana, there's one kind of, not a huge climb, but it's substantial. As I was climbing up that, I had my nose, all of a sudden my nose kind of like popped, and I could breathe through my nose again, and it was this weird sensation of pleasure and pain, and I was able to breathe again, and it was fantastic. Then I descended into Sealy Lake, and since I dealt with pneumonia there, and I kind of knew what Sealy Lake was about, I also knew they had a laundromat, which was definitely needed at the time, and showers. So it's like, Sealy Lake, I can get there, get cleaned up, and food and whatnot. So again, Sealy Lake being one of those spots that I had to pull the plug from before, and to get there was, I was pretty excited. Got showered, felt great, so I kept going. Again, the bears. Just a little bit north of Sealy Lake on the route. It's kind of an old logging area and such, and I pedaled about 10 miles north of Sealy and was like, I'm just going to camp here for the night, and I was feeling pretty good, so it was the only time well, here's the shower and laundry. Nachos. So the only night I decided to partake of Caveman TV was just north of Sealy Lake, and it was like, yep, crashed, chilled, relaxed, had a good night's sleep. Well, I kind of turned off on one of these little side roads for the logging, and I crossed this little muddy section, and then set up my bivvy and started my fire and proceeded to fall asleep real quick. Well, the next morning, I crossed that same little muddy splotch, and I wasn't thinking at the time, I should have taken a picture, but in my tracks from the evening before, there was a couple of big bear prints through that mud, not even 25 feet from where I was sleeping that night. So that was a little scary, and I ended up pedaling up that next climb pretty quickly. Dropped down off of the other side of Sealy Lake, and Montana had a pretty bad bit of wind. I think it was probably the same wind I was experiencing in Wyoming. A lot of the southbounders missed this, but there's about an 8-mile section where a bunch of the old growth trees have been blown down over the road that was part of the route. So again, mosquitoes, bugs. I took, before I got to the trees blown down, ran into a lemonade stand, and I've always made it a rule when I'm riding a bicycle that if a kid's doing a lemonade stand, I gotta stop. But the blow-down trees, for nearly 8 miles, I was either dragging my bike over them or ducking them under or climbing. And that particular day after I got over the pass after the bears, after I got down heading towards, heading north, I probably only covered about 6 miles in about 8 hours. There's I passed also where those blow-down trees. That was fairly nearby where my bike got stolen the first year. So it was also kind of again another milestone. And you know, at this point, I'm like, I'm seeing the end of Montana and like the U.S. section of the route, and like, and these trees happen, and you know, I fell on my face, and it's like, okay, what else is going to happen? You know, like, bring it. You know, I'm ready to go. More food. So I made it to Whitefish, and Whitefish was great. You know, it's, there's a bunch of, it's kind of the Montana version of Boulder. You know, there's a lot of restaurants, there's a couple of bike shops, you know, kind of a little hipstery, but, you know, got some good food, and ended up crashing at the campground there, and was like, okay, yeah, I'm going to make it to Roosevelt and get to the border tomorrow. And, you know, I was pretty excited about that. And I was excited to get over Red Feather Pass without trudging through the snow, which I had done in years past, where there had actually even been avalanche snowdrifts over the road. So to have that road dry was like fantastic, and it was like even the climb didn't feel nearly as bad as it had before. And I stopped at the top of Red Feather Lake, and it's just, it was gorgeous to be there without snow. Ran into another couple that they ended up changing their plans from racing the divide to touring part of the divide, because a day before they started the ride, they found out they were pregnant. So dropping into Roosevelt was great. You know, it's like, okay, I'm you know, 350 miles from Banff. I'm going to get this done. I ran into this fellow named Charlie who was touring the route, and he, I'm not sure I can add anything to the picture. Everything? Cafe Jack's is a great little joint in Roosevelt, Montana, and had a big old breakfast. Crashed in the city park. The city park's great. They, you know, in the maps that Adventure Cycling provides, they're like, well, if you call the sheriff's department, one of the deputies will come down with a key and let you into the showers, and you can just crash, and they just want to know that you're there. And so I did that, and that was actually the first night in 2,500 miles that I had rain, and it rained hard. So that next morning at Cafe Jack's, a good greasy breakfast hit the spot. The hot shower was great, and then I even hit the laundromat in Roosevelt because it didn't look like the rain was going to let down. So I dried off everything and then headed north and crossed the border into British Columbia. Well, at the border crossing station, I have this face that's all scabbed up and swollen still, and it looks like I've been in a fight. Well, this cute little gal at the border crossing asks for my passport. I give her all that information, and she's just like looking at me, and like, you know, I could tell what was going through her head, like, what's up? And so I described what had happened and all that, and she's like, well, if you crash in Canada, do you have insurance? So that, you know, do you have the means to take care of yourself? And like, she was like really concerned that, you know, I wasn't going to be able to take care of myself in Canada. I was like, I'm covered, don't worry about it, I'm good, you know. And I ended up spending about 20 minutes in answering the question about 5 different ways, and which I was okay with because she was pretty attractive. So this was one of the brief moments of sunshine that particular day after I crossed the border, and good steep climb. And after you do the steep climb, you kind of drop down into this old logging area, and then the route kind of just disappears. There's not a whole lot of route there, and it was raining, and there was some tree falls, and so I was very happy to have the GPS at that point, and ended up having to drag my bike and slide on my butt because there was some pretty steep sections, and some of the southbounders had chewed up one of the slopes pretty bad. So I ended up taking a tumble because I was on foot and sliding around, and did take a lot of pictures through this section because of the rain and what was going on. After I got through that, it wasn't even single track, it was pretty much full-on bushwhacking. There's so much water also that a lot of the areas were flooded. So I, at one point, kind of bushwhacking, I was up to my kneecaps in water, trying to find the route and looking at my GPS screen and looking at the map and getting cold. And so I finally made it through this section of bushwhacking and get back on this sort of a logging road and keep on going. And I saw on the map that, 50 miles or so, there's this cabin in the Canadian park system. There's these cabins that are kind of first come, first serve, and if they're just free to use, you're just supposed to, you know, be kind and leave it better than you found it and that sort of thing. So I was like pinning my hopes on this cabin that A, it would be empty, or B, anybody that was there was going to be super nice and friendly and and let me in and let me share. So I'm cold and wet and everything's soaked at this point, and about 15 miles away from this cabin, it starts snowing. And it's that 33, 34 degrees, sleety, wet, cold, I was not in a happy frame of mind, and I was just praying for this cabin to show up. And I get to the cabin, nobody's there. The little stove had the kindling already set up, and so I just lit a fire, and there was a stack of wood, and I like sprawled out and used the bunks as like clothesline, and I just literally like fell into bed and woke up like 7 hours later, and was just like super relieved that that cabin was there when it was there, and I didn't have to bivvy in the cold. Here's the outside. This section of the Canadian Park System is just north of Glacier, and it's been described as the Serengeti of North America. There's not a lot of people. There's been some logging through there at various points, but there just isn't any towns really, so it's kind of out there, and the solitude is beautiful out there, but the amount of water that they've had in terms of rainfall, there was some creek crossings that there was some culverts and such, but the culverts were gone because the road had been washed out. Some good climbing. Stunning. Well, I get to the next town up in Canada, and I ran into my Australian couple again. Our paths had crossed again, and it was fantastic to hang out with them a bit, and we had lunch again, and we exchanged emails and phone numbers and everything else, and they're like, well, if you're ever in Perth, and I was like, well, if you're ever in Southwest Utah, and you know, like, let's stay in touch, and I'll send you these pictures when I get home, and this is also incidentally the biggest dump truck ever manufactured. There's a lot of coal mining and gold mining. At this point, though, I'm feeling pretty stoked. I'm like 160 miles away from Banff, and my friend Jill Homer put me in contact with this guy Keith and his wife Leslie that lived in Banff, and were like, "Oh, Dave, yeah, you can totally stay at Keith and Leslie's. Let me, I'll call them up and let them know that you're there." And they actually been watching me on spot, and like they're excited to meet you. I was like, okay, cool, awesome. I'm still not there, but yeah, awesome. So I spent one last night. I managed to get about 90 miles from Banff before I call it a night, and at this point, at that prior town, I had put my credit card into an ATM, and the ATM ate my card. So I had 40 bucks cash on me and no card. So I go into the grocery store that was next to the bank, and I asked to get, I think it was a Friday afternoon, so it's like, or Friday evening, so I couldn't contact that bank or anything, and I was like, well, at the grocery store, I was like, well, do you guys take U.S. currency? And the gal was like, well, not typically, no, but I'll cover you, And so I grabbed some food and all of that. So maybe it wasn't even 40 bucks, maybe it was 20 or 30 bucks, but I did the last 140 miles to Banff on 30 bucks in calories. But so gorgeous. But again, lots and lots of water. So it seemed like about every 4 or 5 miles I was getting my feet wet, up to my knees, crossing all these different spots. I'm getting up close to the last, there's a moose out there that you can kind of sort of see. The last divide crossing, I specifically saved one last maker's mark for my last time crossing the physical divide, which also incidentally was about 60 miles away from Banff. And the pictures really just do not do it proper justice. At this point, coming around the lake, it's probably about 8 p.m. and I'm just trying to do the math. You know, it's about 20 miles to Banff the rest of the way, and it's like 8 p.m., 8:30, and the last 20 miles into Banff are one of the biggest bear areas to be bear aware, and so you don't want to be camping out in those sections, and it's not really legal to camp. So it's like, at this point on the dam, I'm like, well, do I camp here or do I just push it? And it's like, I'm this close, I'm just going for it. Here's the park bench that's on the top of that. If you're going northbound, it's the last time you cross the divide. If you're going southbound, it's the first time you pass. So I roll into to Banff, the Banff Springs Hotel. There's a rock arch, and that's the start if you're going southbound, and it's the finish, so to speak, if you're going northbound. And Keith was there with the owner of the bike shop up there, and they had a cooler full of beer, and they had some burritos and some hot dogs. And they'd been watching me on the internet, and there was 4 guys there, and they were waited around until 11:15 when I rolled through, and they like grabbed my bike up from me and tossed it in the truck, and they hauled me to the bike shop, and we ended up hanging out drinking beer until nearly 4 a.m. And so that 2,745 miles took me 33 days, 14 hours, and 15 or so minutes. Does anybody have any questions? I don't have a good answer for that. I don't know. Although Keith, the gentleman that met me at the finish, he's talking about touring the route with a mutual friend of ours, Cricket, this June, so I might join him for a few weeks from New Mexico into Colorado. Camping was probably 60% of the time.
I wasn't here for the beginning, but when did you do this? What part of the year?
The year that I finished the route, I started I think it was May 30th, 2012, in Antelope, New Mexico.
Okay. You encountered a lot of like unrideable terrain because of like when you go over the passes with the snow and everything?
I ran into about 3/4 of a mile of snow on the Bozos Ridge in New Mexico. A little bit of snow, but not bad on Independence Pass, dropping down into Del Norte. But other than that, that was it for the snow that year. In the years past, I've up in Montana, I've post-holed for nearly 8 miles before.
How do you maintain such a positive attitude?
there's some pretty dark spots that you get your head into along the route, but I guess what I've figured out, at least for me, is if I'm really in a bad spot in the late afternoon or evening, I'll just kind of go out and bear it, or I'll crash and sleep, and I'll make any sort of rash decision the next morning after getting some rest and some food in my belly, or at least even getting rest if I don't have any food in my pack or anything else, and just try to just give myself some sort of reset. And again, there's those like mental carrots of, you know, oh, okay, well, I'll get myself a Frosty. I know there's a Wendy's in Cuba. I'll get myself a big chocolate Frosty, you know, and and you know that does at least a lot for me in terms of motivating. The trouble is when you know you roll in and that Wendy's is closed, or you got confused of which town you were in, and that, oh, they don't have a Wendy's. And just being able to like every year I've had a plan, and that plan has changed within 15 miles of starting. And you've got to have a plan, but you also have to be like totally ready to just like throw it out the window and come up with a new one, and not let that like invade your brain space and twist you up. I definitely would think that. I think that I've learned far more from my mistakes and my failures than my success. And I don't think that if I had what I had happened in 2012 without having those prior experiences beating me up, so to speak, I probably would have given up in 2012 on any number of occasions, because I hadn't already had my feet to the grindstone, so to speak.
What was the budget that you used, or the total amount of money that you spent on this successful route?
I figure I ended up spending about $2,000 in 2012. When I recommend anybody doing the route in a time trial race situation, I say, give it $1 per mile budget, and that gives you a pretty good, a relatively good margin of error and repairs and motel rooms and food. I mean, bar none the biggest expense is food. I mean, there are times that I ordered 3 or 4 breakfasts at a diner, and you're just so hungry, and the diner is the only thing that's available to get any sort of calories, so you're taking stuff to go and to keep moving.
What was the best thing you ate?
They're outside of Jackson, Wyoming. I'm forgetting the name of the place, but they had this stuffed French toast that had like it was like stuffed with like cream cheese and a bunch of berries, and it was just like ginormous, and it was fantastically yummy. I had seconds, and the waitress was blown away when I cleared the next plate. And she said she'd seen divide racers eat a lot along the route, but I guess I topped them, so.
What was your sleeping kit?
My sleeping kit in the year that I completed the route was a bivvy, a pretty waterproof bivvy from Sierra Designs. I forget the model name. A Big Agnes inflatable insulated pad, and a 600 fill down sleeping bag. Northbound, I feel the route was originally designed to be southbound, and that's what the queues are all designed around from the maps at Adventure Cycling. And I would say a greater majority of the climbs are a lot more friendly going southbound versus northbound. There's basically a few guys have I've joked that if you're going southbound, you're doing a shovel ride because Antelope Wells is about 70 feet lower than Banff, Alberta. So.
What would you say as far as logistics? What would you recommend getting yourself in the bike?
I think, having a friend or family driving you there is, the best way to ensure that you've got your gear and all your stuff with you. Barring that, I would say, shipping with UPS or FedEx and getting your bike shipped to a town nearby, and flying or busing or training or whatever would be my second choice.
So, not Greyhound?
No Greyhound.
No flats.
No flats that year. Pretty. No. Other than that rack that was holding my bag on, no mechanical issues whatsoever.
Any other questions out there today? All right, let's give him a round of applause. He's opening another beer, so if anybody wants to buy him around, he's probably on a bike, so it's somewhat safe, right? Yeah. But thank you guys so much for coming out once again. Two more things I wanted to mention to you, well, four. My wife just shaking angry fist at me. First is Saturday, we've got another presentation here, which is Brad and Melissa McQueen about in May of 2001, they were stuck on Mount Evans. Melissa lost 8 of her toes due to frostbite, some exposure issues. They say it's going to be all about homebrew and tales of woe. So you guys should definitely come up for that. That's 6 p.m. on Saturday, right here. UpaDowna is the one that kind of hosted this deal tonight. We do about 163 events a year, all ages, all ability levels, anything and everything. We've got some flyers up at this table here. Honestly, we do too much for me to give you the rundown right now, so I'd appreciate it if you took a look at that, figured it all out, and joined us perhaps in the future. The last two things that the Angry Fist said was, it is St. Paddy's Day. Thank you for being a little bit Irish with us tonight. And I've heard that all beers with green on the label, all canned beers are $1 off. And there's something else. What was I supposed to say? Oh, I already did. This thing. The Brad McQueen thing. So thanks again. I really appreciate you guys coming out. One more round of applause for Dave. And please do some more, please.